There's a rule that shows up again and again in folklore from wildly different corners of the world, and it's always some version of the same warning. If you're alone in the dark and you hear your name called out, don't answer. Not the first time. Not the second. Maybe not ever. Appalachian settlers told their children this. Filipino elders tell it about the Aswang. And the Navajo, whose ancestral homeland sits at the meeting point of 4 American states, tell a version of it too, that a skinwalker or a naaldlooshii can mimic the voice of a loved one or call a person by name in order to lure them away from safety and into the dark. Four Corners itself, the only place in the United States where 4 state lines meet at a single point, sits almost entirely on Navajo Nation land. It's remote, it's beautiful, and depending on who you ask, it's not entirely empty out there after the sun goes down. Scattered around this region are a handful of National Guard armories, a decommissioned Army Ordnance Depot, and training areas used by units rotating through for annual exercises, which means that over the decades, more than a few young MPs have found themselves walking a fence line in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, when something out past the wire decided to say their name. These are their stories. Fort Wingate sits just east of Gallup, New Mexico, close enough to Four Corners region that its history is deeply tied to the Navajo people who call this land home. Once an active Army post, it later served for decades as a munitions storage depot, guarded around the clock by details who pulled long, quiet shifts along its perimeter. This account was submitted anonymously to a military ghost story archive by a man who says he served as an MP there in the early 1990s. He writes, I want to preface this by saying I grew up in New Mexico, not far from Rez, so I'd already heard skinwalker stories my whole life. I never believed a word of it until I did a rotation guarding the old bunkers out at Wingate. Most of what we did was mind-numbing. Drive the perimeter road, stop, listen, keep moving. One night my partner and I stopped a truck near Bunker Row to stretch our legs, and clear as day, I heard my name.
Marcus.
Not shouted, just said calmly, like someone standing right next to me had said it. I turned around expecting my partner to be messing with me, but he was 30 feet away leaning against the truck, and the second I looked at him I could tell by his face he'd heard it too, except he swears it said his name, not mine. We never talked about it much after that night. We just got back in the truck and finished the route faster than we needed to. What makes this account interesting isn't just a location, though Fort Wingate's proximity to Navajo land makes it an obvious candidate for this kind of story. It's the detail that both men reportedly heard something different, each hearing their own name and nobody else's, which lines up almost exactly with older Navajo testimony describing these entities as capable of speaking directly and individually to more than one person at once. Before we get to the next account, it's worth pointing out that the don't answer when your name is called warning isn't unique to the American Southwest, and it isn't some recent internet invention either. Early ethnographic recordings of Navajo oral tradition dating back over a century already describe this exact caution being passed down from elders to children. The belief predates smartphones, predates creepypasta forums, predates almost every modern retelling you'll find online today. Whatever is being described, the warning itself has clearly been around a very long time.
Post 2, radio check.
Post 2, Post 1, 5 by 5, go ahead.
Yeah, you got anybody doing PT out past the motor pool right now?
Negative, Post 2, it's 0200. Nobody's out there. Why?
Somebody just said my name. Real close, like right behind the fence.
Post 2, say again?
Never mind, probably the wind.
This account was shared by a Colorado National Guard veteran who did weekend drills and armory not far from the Four Corners region during annual training. He writes, "It was maybe 2 a.m, and I was walking aboard little post nobody actually cared about, just a formality for the exercise.
Daniel.
I heard my name, clear as anything, coming from just past the tree line outside the fence. I called it in because I genuinely thought maybe one of the guys had wandered off post to mess with me. Nobody was out there. My squad leader actually laughed it off the next morning, but then an older guy in my unit, a guy who'd grown up nearby, got real quiet and told me flat out not to answer if it ever happened again. He didn't explain much beyond that. He just said his grandmother used to say the same thing about that whole stretch of land." Most of these stories end in the same way, with a service member staying quiet, walking away, and never finding out what exactly called out to them. This next account, submitted through a paranormal research page dedicated to collecting military encounters, is a little different, because this MP admits he didn't follow the rule everyone else seemed to instinctively understand. He writes, "I wasn't from the area and I didn't grow up with any of these stories, so when I heard someone call my name while I was posted near a supply yard fence line, close to the Four Corners area, I just answered normally, like you would if a buddy called out to you. I said, 'Yeah, what's up?' And then everything went dead silent. Not just quiet, silent, like the crickets and wind just stopped all at once. That silence lasted maybe 10 seconds, and then it was like someone hit play again on the world, bugs, wind, all of it back at once. I never heard my name again that night, but I also never went back out on that post alone again, if I could help it." He goes on to say that when he mentioned the experience to a local co-worker years later, off the reservation entirely, the man's reaction was immediate and serious, warning him that answering is supposedly the one thing you're never, ever supposed to do. There's an obvious explanation sitting right there for all of this. Wind moving through fence lines and scrub brush can produce sound the sleep-deprived human brain is more than happy to interpret as speech, especially speech aimed directly at you, because our minds are wired to pick our own name out of background noise faster than almost anything else. That's a documented psychological phenomenon with a name of its own, and it would go a long way toward explaining every account in this video on its own. But it doesn't explain why a warning this specific, "Don't answer when you hear your name in the dark," shows up independently across cultures that had no contact with one another, long before psychology had a word for what your brain does when it hears your own name. And it doesn't explain why, of all the places these stories keep surfacing from, so many of them cluster around this same stretch of high desert where 4 states, and a much older set of stories, all happen to meet at a single point. If you've ever heard your name called out on post somewhere out west, and you know exactly what stretch of fence line I'm talking about, I'd like to hear about it. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to the channel members keeping this thing running. And if you're out on a lonely post tonight, maybe just let it ring twice before you decide it was nothing. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next one.